If you saw my little thumbnail and clicked on it, you probably wondered just how much of a pickle I could get myself into. This week, Country Creek. It's a wonderful painting full of all sorts of different types of trees. It's a lovely painting for a beginner. We'll start off by doing some nice canvas prep, some nice background trees and some misty effects. Then we'll start working on layering the trees. And then finally we'll move into the midground and the foreground, where I start getting myself into a bit of a pickle. So don't move, there's lots to see, and watch the painting all the way to the very end. Happy painting, people! So here's my canvas for today's painting. It's my usual paper DIY canvas. This is a lining paper which you can buy from most DIY stores, big box stores, and this has been coated with 2 coats of grey gesso to seal the surface. Remember, this is a wet on wet oil painting project, and if this is absorbent then the paints won't work. This must be completely sealed. Today I'm also using some black gesso to do some background. This is the one I'm going to be using. It's Peebo Studio Acrylics. I have some links down in the description below. But black gesso and acrylic, well, they're pretty much interchangeable these days. I've used both and they both seem to work quite well. So let's put some of this on my favourite little plastic plate. I'm going to use a foam brush. Today's painting is inspired by the Bob Ross classic, Countryside Creek. And I'm going to take a little bit of black gesso or black acrylic on a little foam brush. And this is a lovely sort of country scene set deep in a forest. Now over here on the right hand side there is quite a big tree, so I'll make a little mark for that. And there's some background trees back in here. So again, just some little marks. I just want to kind of plot my painting out a little bit. And this one has a little bit more detail on it, so we'll just put some little squiggles on there. That's going to be a nice big fir tree. So you can see I didn't take much care with this, I just dropped it in. It's more about the position and rough size rather than detail at this stage. Back in here, lots of background detail and trees. Again, this is all just background filler. You sort of got to have some filling behind the painting here. And again, you can put a little bit of zigzag in. But don't spend a lot of time doing this because we're going to be overpainting this with more trees. Let's have some of these going off the top. Maybe give them a little bit of a zigzag. And if these show through, then they'll look like a really lovely dense forest. And over in here, we're going to get a lot darker. In fact, we're going to be bringing this dark colour down all the way. And we're going to bring it into here as well. So this is all going to be done with this black gesso. Now let it sit and dry for at least half an hour. So here's my canvas. Now really check and make sure it's completely dry before you start applying oil paint to it. And before we start putting colour on, we need something like this. Bob Ross Liquid Clear Oil Paint. This seals my canvas up, ready for wet on wet oil painting. But you might not have this, so let's try a substitute. And this is refined linseed oil. By applying a thin, even coat of an oil-based product, we can seal up our canvas. It means we can actually blend and mix colours directly on the canvas. I'm going to apply a very small amount of this linseed oil. I've got some in a dish here with an old Bob Ross landscape brush. This needs to be applied thinly. I might have said that once or twice already. But you definitely want to put this on here so sparingly that you can barely see it. If your canvas is too wet, then everything you try and apply on top in the way of colours and you try to blend and mix, well, you'll become a mud mixer. Really scrub this well into the canvas. So here's my canvas. I've just done the top section with linseed oil. I'm going to be doing this today. I've put a piece of tape here to sort of show where the linseed oil stopped. I'm going to do the lower section maybe tomorrow. But the first thing I want to do is to try and create a nice misty background effect. And for this, I'm probably going to use my old brush. I'll give that a bit of a dry clean on some paper towel first, so we don't add any more linseed oil to our painting. On my palette, I've put out just 2 colours to start with, a little titanium white and some phthalo blue. And I'm going to use this old brush, say just a little bit of that titanium white. I'm just going to scrub into the background. Now, if you apply it very thinly, you can get this lovely misty effect to work. You can see my trees look like they were sort of sinking back into the background of my painting. It's a neat way of creating sort of atmosphere in your work, really quite quickly. And I'll let some of this colour just sort of drift out over some of these trees. And if you put on too much, well, as you see, you can just rub your brush over it and just sort of rub it out a bit. So it's a very nice, easy way of applying sort of a paint glaze to your scene without sort of having to work too hard at it. For my background sky, I want sort of a nice bluish tone, fairly bright. So I've gone for phthalo blue. It's quite bright and sparkly, and when it hits that titanium white, it'll give us a nice pastel look. But be careful, this is a real bully. This colour will turn your whole world bright blue if you're not careful. So I always start up in my corners and I'll apply a little bit, and if it's too strong, I can always knock some of that off on a paper towel. And just pick up that paper towel you dry cleaned your brush on, give it a quick dab, and then give it another try. And so if it's too strong, you can always give it another quick dry clean. I would rather do a couple of sort of tests and then wipe off some of the excess paint than do a lot of painting and then realise that when I stand back it looks far too blue. Now, of course, this will fade a little bit as it picks up more of that titanium white. As you see, it starts to really fade away. It creates that sort of nice sort of misty blue-grey colour we want for our painting. Now here's a top tip. Spend a good few minutes blending this background sky. Once you start painting trees on top of it, well, it's going to be impossible to get back there to do any repairs. So I do a little bit of blending, I stand back and I blend again. And when I'm really know I'm happy with it, then I'll move on to painting my first trees. To underpaint the trees, I want to cover this section in a nice mixture, dark green sort of olive colour. And for this, I'm going to be using some sap green and some Van Dyke brown. Again, same old brush. I haven't bothered to do anything with it about wiping it. I've just gone straight into this colour. And let's say just a little bit of a brush mix. I don't really want one colour. I want lots of variety. So pull them down, get them nicely mixed, both sides of the brush. And I want to just say work this well into my canvas. As you can see, as I touch that white, you get a bit of that greenish brown tone coming through. This, again, just adds more depth into our painting. It gives us a nice base upon which we can add colour. I'll add a little more Van Dyke brown here, get a nice little brownish tone, and then add a little more sap green in other places. So just sort of make this look more like camouflage, I suppose, at this stage. And don't worry about going out over the edges of some of those trees. This is all going to become part of the painting when we put some more defined trees on top. So this is really kind of more like sort of an underpainting, a tone or a tint for the canvas overall. Just a nice easy way of glazing our painting, getting a little bit of atmosphere going in our painting. You also notice that I let some of this colour sort of swirl up into the centres of some of the bigger fir trees on the right hand side. As I say, I don't necessarily want to see just a big patch of colour. I sort of go back in and again swirl in some darker greens and some darker browns. This layering technique just makes our painting sort of gain depth and distance. It's a quick way of getting our painting to really start coming together nice and quickly. For my first background trees, I'm going to carry on using that old 1-inch brush. Here you see, I'm just going to load both sides really well with paint. Make sure the brush sort of holds a good shape. Now, I'm going to pick one of these background trees, maybe this one here, and just leave your brush on its side and sort of handle slightly raised and just press. What I'm looking here to do is sort of leave a little imprint of all the bristles, sort of create a sort of spiky looking fir tree. And that's it. It's as simple as that. Just with enough paint and a little bit of pressure, a little push, a little more pressure at the bottom, you can get the trees a little wider. You can create a fir tree. And I think this has got to be one of the easiest ways to add a fir tree to a painting. I'm going to have these as sort of background fir trees. So I'll add a few more here and there between the other ones. And overall, this will create a nice dense looking forest. Here you can see how using that sort of misty background makes these trees stand out. Each layer needs to be either lighter or darker to make the previous layer work. So think about this when you're adding those misty layers. Don't be too mean with it. Add a nice amount of mist all over sort of most of the top section of the painting. Even these ones here in the background just show up. Once again, It's just a case of layering one tree on top of another. Now we have the basic background trees darkened in. I like to lighten just a few. Take a little touch of white, just a little hint to lighten this colour. Now, in Bob's original painting, he did this light stage right at the very start. Problem is, when I do that, I tend to make the background all a bit too bright. So I like to start off with some darker ones first, and I can pick and choose which ones I want to make stand out. Maybe that one. And here you get a chance to judge how bright they are. So that one really stands out. Maybe it caught a little more of the light coming through from there. And again, just a little press on the side of the brush. You can just lift a tree from the background, bring it forwards. Maybe that one got a little light on it too. So you get to pick and choose which ones you want to stand out. But not all of them get this treatment. Some of them I'm going to leave nice and dark. And there, you can pick and choose which ones are brighter. Sometimes it's just nice putting just a few random taps here and there for some background bushes. And if you get either a little bit too bright, just redarken your brush, put a little bit more sap green and Van Dyke brown on it, and you can calm it right down. There, just toning the painting lighter and darker. Now, let's paint some more defined sort of trees in here. I want to use my fan brush for this next stage of the trees. To underpaint my fir trees, I'm going to be using some sap green Van Dyke brown, some black, and the remainder of my phthalo blue. And a little bit of white, well, that won't matter. What we're looking for though is a good dark green colour. Mix this well. And there you see the colour I've made. Using a white palette is very useful. Now, let's paint some fir trees. For the next layer of fir trees, you're going to need two fan brushes. Well, I prefer to. One of them will be dark and one of them will be used for highlights. So it's useful to have two fan brushes on the go. The first fan brush is going to be used with the dark green underpainting. Now, a question I get asked quite often is that the colour that I'm mixing up here and that you're trying to use on your own paintings is too dry. And people want to start putting some odorless thinners into it or linseed oil to make it thinner. And I say don't do that. You actually want this to be firm and dry. Because the golden rule is that a thin oily paint, which will be one of the cad yellows or the Indian yellows, will stick to a thick dry colour. Thin paints stick to thick dry paints. So you really want this as thick and dry as possible. Now, I've got any of these trees I'm not so sure about. I can always convert them into a new sort of tree, but I can also fill in some gaps in between. I like to start off by using my fan brush and just do the centre line of the tree first. Get that nicely established. And these trees have got downward facing branches. So as you can see from the shape of my brush, got a nice sort of downward edge to it. And if I touch on the painting like that, you see it does a nice sort of downward curve. As I want to go up the tree, I need to use less and less of the brush, but still pressing down. So I can make smaller branches, and at the very, very top, I just barely touch. So that shows you little branches, medium branches, full-size branches, and at the base, I can go even wider by tapping either side of centre. So you can see you can make a nice sort of tree by just changing the angle of your brush from corner to centre and then zigzagging. So let's fill in the rest of my tree, touching on the centre. And as you see, I've passed that point, so I'm going to start swinging my brush across a little more. See, I've moved it across. So I'm sort of halfway. And from here on in, I need to use more pressure and more of the brush. And listen to that sound. It's making a lovely crunching sound. If you don't hear the crunching sound, then you're not pressing hard enough. You're letting the brush slide. Now, I quite like these two trees here, but I'm not so sure about this one. let's change that one into a darker tree and bring it from the background into the foreground. Now, if I stand back and look, I see all my trees are starting to lean a little bit. And if you do that, you can easily straighten things up. I try and get a little bit straighter with this tree. There we go. So I just moved the center over a tiny bit. And again, remember, start on a little corner, a few little touches. As I come down the tree, I'm going to let my brush start to swing towards the center, still pressing down, not sliding, but pressing and pushing. Down in here, I'm using the full width of my brush and zigzagging a little bit to grow it just a little more. And to fill in some of the gaps, I'm doing some little upward presses with my brush. This kind of creates some nice sort of foliage, but it's down in the depths, so you won't see this a great deal. But it just adds a nice sense of fill to my painting. To give my little fir trees a bit more structure, I want to create a nice trunk. For this, I'm going to use a little drop of titanium white, pop it over there, a little touch of dark sienna. And if you've seen me do these before, I marble mix them, which means that you want to just mix them very, very loosely and don't overdo it because they'll turn sort of strange caramel brown colour. You can even add a little touch of dark sienna, but once again, keep this very kind of loosely mixed. And I like to take the small blade of my knife for this, take a little touch, and think about where you might see a little of the tree trunk peeking through, so you don't need it everywhere. Just here and there, down the centre line of the tree trunk, just touch, give it a little pull. That looks a little bright, doesn't it? Let's remix my colours. There we go. Take a little bit of that slightly darker colour, give that a test. Yes, that looks about right, doesn't it? Bright enough, but not too bright. But don't worry, because we're going to be doing some highlighting on top of these, and that'll calm things down a little bit more. There we go. So you get used to playing with your paints and changing the way they look, and don't get too sort of concerned about them. Highlighting our trees is what we need that second fan brush for. And I'm going to go into some of this cadmium yellow colour. Take a little touch of sap green into it. Now, as I mentioned earlier, these colours are oily and wet. You can see they've got a nice sort of shine to them. And that's what we need to make this work. Remember, these light, fine, thin, oily paints will stick to the nice dark green colours. I think that might be a little bit too vibrant. What do you think? Yes, I think so. Let's put a little bit more sap green into it. Maybe even a touch of the original dark green colour. Just take a little on my brush and put it over to one side. You see, by using that colour, I've toned everything down. Give your brush a little push into that paint. And again, try a few colours out. I'm going to try this one here. It's already pretty bright. So again, tip your brush slightly over on a corner. Remember, the light is coming strongly from the right hand side, so that's predominantly the side that's going to be brightest. And here you see what I mean about painting right across the centre of the tree. A few little touches, a little darker here and there, brighter on the right, getting darker, darkest here on the left. So this way you're painting each little piece of your tree at a time. Brightness going through into the darker side. I'll carry on adding highlights to my tree, and if I don't like what I've done, I can always come back and change it. I'm doing a slightly different colour on this tree here. I'm putting a little touch more of the Indian yellow colour into here. And once again, I'm just doing the odd branch now and then. I'm not doing every single branch. And that's one of the secrets of painting good fir trees, is that you want to do probably about less than half of the branches in highlight, because the vast majority of this tree is going to be in dark shadow. And as we come down, we get to more and more of the shadow. Down in here, darkest of all, the brush run out of colour. So you have these really nicely highlighted trees. Now, you see the difference between these three trees. This was my first one, my second one, and my third one. This sort of tree is probably the one we'll do most of when we start painting. It's a little bit over highlighted, the colours are a little bit off. You see that big chunk there, and these brush strokes are, well, they're not quite as nice as the other ones. This tree is the sort of tree you paint when you've had a little more practice. You're a bit more confident. And then finally, this little tree. This one is one of my favourite sorts of trees. Understated but beautiful. It's got some lovely texture to it, lots of lovely darks in it. But you see the difference between these two trees. This one's not quite as good. This one I think is better. And what can we do about it? Well, let's fix this tree, just so you can actually see how you can take a tree that's now not quite so good and repair it. The first tip is to take your palette knife and remove any heavy colour that's on here. Because trust me, trying to paint highlights over the tops of highlights, it never works. It always just ends up becoming a mud mixer. So let's get rid of that little bit of paint. I've still got my nice dark green brush here, and just let's overpaint it. So you don't have to replace all of it, you just have to get rid of the over bright trunk and the highlights that aren't really working well. And it doesn't take many seconds before you actually have your dark tree back again. And there you are. I've restored it back to its original dark colour. Drop in the suggestion of a bit of a centre line for the tree trunk. Not too bright this time, not too sort of bold. And some fresh highlights, again in a slightly more sort of subtle colour. And I'm going to do just here and there. Maybe a little bit more light on some of these branches. So just a little more cadmium yellow here and there for that right hand side. And suddenly we see a beautiful tree, restored from its original version, which wasn't so clever. Right, I'm going to add a little bit more of the highlight in here, but I'm going to keep this fairly subdued because what comes next are some really bright little trees and they need some dark to play against. And right, some of these trees you're going to hardly see at all. They're going to stay in the background. With the tape off, I can come back in with another little drop of that linseed oil and wet the lower portion of my painting. Once again, apply it very sparingly. And of course, we'll add some more of this lovely dark green colour that we made up for the evergreens. I'm going to add a little more Van Dyke brown into it again. So we've got a nice mixture of sap green and Van Dyke brown. And if there's a hard line in here, I can always take some of that colour up, just to break up that line a little bit more. And when this is all dry, no one will be able to tell that there was a join there at all. And don't forget, golden rule, always test your canvas, even though you think you've got it right. It's always good to get a sample to make sure you've got enough colour. I can see here that down in this section, well, it's a little bit more oil than paint. So I'm going to add a little bit more sap green and brown down in this section. The rest, I think, is going to work out quite well. In Bob's original painting, the creek comes through this section of the painting. And from experience, I know how easy it is sometimes to run out of room for a feature like that. Somehow all this seems to creep down, even though we had a piece of tape there and we measured things. And what I like to try and do is to sort of do a little bit of a sketch, just to keep me in position. So I'm going to take just a filbert brush and a little touch of white paint. Now, it doesn't want to be too bright, let's put a bit of that green colour with it. But I want to be able to just mark the position of my stream. And by doing this, it means if I get something in the wrong position, I can easily rub it out. Now the stream, if I bring Bob's painting up in here in the corner, you can see that the stream starts quite sort of high up, just sort of up there somewhere. And there's a sort of an island here. So if I sort of sketch around where I think the island's going to be, so there we go, sort of comes around and there's a bush on the end there. And then I hope you can see that. Let me break that a bit brighter. I've just looked at the screen and realised actually this looks terribly dark. You can't see a thing, can you? So that's going to be a piece of land there. A little brighter. Now there's going to be, the creek is going to be through here. There's going to be some nice land coming in through here. So let's put a little bit of a wiggle and a jiggle through there. Got to leave room for a nice big rock just there. So this is all going to be water in here. So if I just run my brush about and say, just really marking the position of the water for the creek. Now, of course, when you do yours, you want it only just visible. I'm making this brighter so you can actually see it on camera. And remember, when you come down in a series of little steps so that it sort of kind of fits in nicely into the painting. But when there's a nice big rock here, and there's nice big rocks across the background too. And that's going to be the next thing I want to put in. Some of these rocks to sort of hold the rest of the forest into the background. For my rocks, I'm going to take some Van Dyke brown and black. Again, make a nice dark, strong colour. Just roughly mix these together. I'm going to take a little roll of that on my palette knife. Now, if you don't like using your palette knife to create rocks, you can use a brush to do it, of course. Now, can you see there's sort of a nice sort of gap there missing? I'm going to put a rock right in there. And again, think about sort of just buttering a piece of toast or a piece of bread. All you're looking here to do is to sort of create a nice sort of stain on the canvas. It can have a little bit more texture to it, so it's a little bit more chunky. So you want some nice little blobs of paint on here, and that will just make highlighting that much easier. So I think that maybe it could even be two rocks, couldn't it? We could have one in the front and one at the back. Again, take the excess paint and just work it into the canvas. I think there should be another rock back in here somewhere. There we go. And again, just press it down into the canvas. A little bit of pressure on the knife, really just push the paint down. But whilst I've got some on the palette knife, let's make something of it. Again, even if we don't highlight this rock, it sort of fills a gap. And this is something I think that, again, comes with a little experience of painting, that it's better to have something in a painting and not need it than to need it and not have it. Sounds like a saying, doesn't it? So I'll put in the extra rocks, even if I don't always use them, but they're there in case I need them. Now, let's highlight these, and I'm going to use some of my marble mix colours to do it. So here's my marble mix colour, dark sienna, white, a touch of Van Dyke brown. I quite like throwing in some yellow ochre as well sometimes. Put that little drop on the side. There. And again, you're taking small rolls of paint, nothing big here, and you're using super light pressure. Once again, think about how the light would come in from one side. Maybe pick one rock that you think would be catching the light. And I think this one here is going to be the one I catch the light with strongest. Again, I'll show you fingers and thumbs. You don't need to use any pressure on your knife. Just touch and drag the knife to one side, and it will come back and give it back to you on your palette knife if it's not meant to stick. Again, just touch. Wow, look at that little pop of light on that stone. Sometimes it's fun, you let a little bit of those blue-green colours creep in there from the background. Put a little bit of a shadow colour in there, so it looks like there's a highlight and a shadow side to your rocks. This might be in shadow. This could be the rock that's going to be my spare little piece of rock that I may not need at all. And again, you decide. I was always saying that when you're painting, you have all the power to decide who gets a bright highlight and who doesn't, and make a few changes. Like that looks really too bright, doesn't it? That really stands out. It's just too bright. So pick up your knife and scratch away at it and create a new piece of rock. And sometimes you just scrape off the paint and there you are. There's the new rock. We don't always have to rework things so very heavily. with our paintings. They can sometimes be just left as they are, and we can have a lot of fun just by not actually working too hard at our paintings. And I think that's really probably one of the most important bits of advice I can give anybody, is especially when you're starting out, is to give yourself permission to get things wrong, to have to scrape things off and do it again, because that's sort of part of sort of learning any kind of a hobby, or any kind of pastime, or doing any kind of task. I had an email from somebody and they were saying they were getting kind of a bit downhearted with their painting, and that little voice in the head was telling them that maybe them and painting weren't a good fit. And I just reminded them that doing any task takes effort, and sometimes we're not kind to ourselves, are we? We tend to give ourselves a bit of a hard time when we start out doing something new. And I reminded them to think about the first time they maybe tied their shoelace, or even drove a car for the first time, how impossible it all felt, trying to do all these things at once and make it all fit together. So sometimes when we're painting, we have to give ourselves permission to do things we don't like. 3 little rocks, they all look a little bit sort of the same size. They all look like they're sort of like eeny, meeny, miny, moe. And maybe one of them doesn't fit so well, and we have to take it away. And that's okay. We can move our paintings around at will. Enjoy the process of learning to paint. It takes time, folks. It takes time to realise that we need to practice our work. To get good at things takes practice. If it was that easy first time out, then there'd be no challenge to it, and everyone would be painting perfect paintings like Michelangelo, and nothing would be special. So I moved my rock along. I'm going to put some new highlight on it, that one there. And I'm going to bring some of that lovely green foliage through there. So I've moved my rock along a few inches, and I think that maybe is going to be a better position for it. Now, let's add some lovely foliage under here, maybe some lovely soft grass, I think. I've got a nice clean, dry 1-inch brush. I'll take a little white, bit of the cad yellow, sap green, Indian yellow. Oh, a nice blend, nice mixture of colours here. Something, a little bit of a brightness to it. So I want it to sort of be catching the light. And I like to take my brush and just push it up into the paint and drive it along so you get this little kind of ridge. Okay, just push it up into the paint. I've got a real bunch of colours there going. And just think about the light again coming through in here. And I'm just going to touch and leave a little suggestion of brightness on the ground. And think about it kind of sloping up from the water's edge. So we'll leave a little shadow in there. And don't worry about this water too much. We'll put that back. This ground isn't completely flat. It has little lumps and bumps and ridges in it. And what you have to do is leave the little shadow lines in there. That's what will give your painting a nice realistic look. And up in here, I want it to be going up into the shadows again, so I don't press so hard and I let the paintbrush run out of paint. I even touch a little bit of the brown from those rocks, and that tones my colour right down. And again, maybe I'll put some more bright colours through there. Again, I really want your eyes to sort of focus on that, on this lovely bright spot here. This is where I want you to be looking very first of all in my painting. I want you to be staring at this spot. Now, let's put some little fir trees on here. And again, some little sparklers, I think. In Bob's painting, he didn't actually, I don't believe, did any kind of underpainting for these little trees here. And these are little, what I call push-up trees. But I'm going to underpaint them. I'm going to take a little of my dark green colour here, what's left on my palette, and I'm going to just do some little push-up strokes. Kind of just get some nice, a bit of dark green texture on there. And you can't really see it against this canvas now because this is all really dark on dark. But trust me, adding a little texture in here is going to make all the difference. You can see the dark green colour against the ground in here. And to make them really sharp, I'm going into some really grubby white, a touch of cadmium yellow. So these are really going to show up, and again, just going to push the paint into the corner of my brush and hold on to your hat. These are really going to show up. Whew, look at that. Again, I'm just pressing with the corner of my brush. Kind of create these nice little shapes. Think about where the shadow might fall. So no Indian yellow and a touch of white. Creates a lovely, lovely bright golden colour. One of my favourites. And pressing a little bit of foliage there too. So you've got a couple of nice little trees. I think something in here as well, maybe. Again, if it's not sticking, add a little more paint to your brush. And it's the paint that sticks. You don't actually want the brush to really hit the canvas too hard. So just done a couple of 3 nice little bushes there. Maybe another one. Just spreading across there. And see how I trapped that little bit of shadow under there. I separated the tree from the land just a tiny bit. And it's those little attention to detail, those little touches that really helps your painting work. And I'm just going to let this colour run out a little bit up here. There we go. Again, I'm using those little shadow lines here just to sit my trees down into my painting. I want this tree to stand away from that one. See how that line, it looks like that tree suddenly became a different colour. So this is where you need to be confident and put a few little pops of brilliant highlight into your painting. So now this stands away from the one behind it. Just need to be able to see these little details in your own painting. Wow, I think that makes such an impact. I think I need to do something with the water next, to maybe put a few little rocks in here. I might use a filbert brush for that. I use my 1-inch brush with some of that highlight to pull down and then brush across, get some nice reflections from that bank side, and everything was going swimmingly well. I got a filbert brush, went into some Van Dyke brown and black, a little touch of highlight, and then did some nice little round river rocks. Smashing! Nothing could go wrong now. I'll blast a few more of these on as I go. Then I get a little bit cocky. I try and paint water with a filbert brush, and it sort of works. Maybe if I just fill it up with rocks. Yeah, that's it. I'll fill up every gap with a rock. And yeah, maybe just too many rocks. I think maybe I should take a few of these dodgy coloured ones off. So now I start scraping away at my painting, and even now I know that really this isn't working out. I know, I'll smother it with paint using a palette knife. That's always the way to fix it, isn't it? Doing the grass, I'm going to take a little tap of white, not much, just a little white, to lighten this colour up just a tiny bit more. And not too much paint when you're doing this, folks, because you can really overwhelm your painting. And just think about where the bright light's coming right through in here, and leave a little gap. Okay, so there's a little drop between the water and the land. And just go in there, give it a little press. Firm pressure, tap and pull straight down. I'll drop in a couple of suggestions for that section too. Fingers crossed it'll all fit together nicely. And then just gently edge to centre. Don't start in the centre and work out, you'll leave a mark. Now, let's put some of those rocks on around the edges of my banks. I'm going to use a filbert brush and double load it. Well, it's the following day. After yesterday's nightmare with the water, I dropped in those reflections and let's have a go at these rocks again. I washed up all my brushes and I even set out a fresh palette because I was getting in a pickle. So once again, a little Van Dyke brown, a little black, brush mixed both sides of the brush, mat it together nicely, and then go one way through some marble mix. And I got white ochre and little dark sienna here. Just one side, pick up a nice amount of that brighter colour. And the light coming in from this side, bright colour to the top, dark colour to the bottom here. And just put in some nice little curves. A little more pressure to get a bit more dark. So you got three nice little rocks there. Squeeze something else into that little gap. If you don't get any light off it, put a bit more paint on. And this time, I'm definitely not going to rush the job. I'm going to just take my time with it. And don't forget, you can also come in and you can make a rock that kind of goes that way as well. There we go. So it's just some nice little river rocks there. Put some little fillers in here too. Last time I used a filbert brush. This time I'm going to use the fan brush like Bob did, or I might use my palette knife, but I definitely won't try and paint water again using a filbert brush. That didn't work out very well, did it? Okay. I feel happy with the palette knife. I'm going to take a little Prussian blue, dab of white. Just make some white with a hint of blue. It's maybe a little too strong on the blue. And again, I'm going to just drop in some water lines here. So just come in under these rocks and give it a little rub. And you can use some firm pressure here. Really push it down into the canvas. And it's always kind of fade away into the background. And as I come forwards, I'm starting to think about leaving a little hole there for a rock. And so I'm going to just use a palette knife for the water this time. So can you see I'm leaving a little hole there. Reload my brush, highlight on the top, dark on the bottom. I'm just going to squeeze it into that gap. I'm going to avoid hitting that bit of white there though. I'm going to just come just inside it. Apply any pressure, press, pull, drop in that little rock. Okay. The temptation is to want to put in 3 or 4 more, and that's really where I got myself into a pickle. I'm going to put some water around this. And then I'm going to think about the next little stone, the next little rock. And again, just making a little kind of a curve there, a little sort of spot in the water where I think it might sit comfortably. Light and dark again. See that little gap? There. I might come back the other way. So I've got a nice little rock in there too. And more ripples. And by doing this kind of systematically, I won't get myself into such a pickle. I'll carry on adding some more little details on some rocks and more water through here, and then we can finish off with this lovely piece of land here on the left hand side. For these little bushes over here on the left hand side, I need a couple of 1-inch brushes. I'm going to use one of my old brushes here for, again, the underpainting, and these are fairly well worn, especially on one corner, because I tend to use one corner, one direction, always through the paint. That's the rounded side of my brush. The crimped side was always at the back. Again, you can see how the corner of that brush is sort of worn off by just continuously loading it the same way. And then I'm going to use a much nicer brush for doing the highlights. So use the old brush for the dark underpainting and the nice brush for the highlights. I remix some of my dark green colour, as I say, rounded side through that lovely sticky dark colour, and you really just want to press the brush down to it and just pull it through a little bit. You want to be able to see this texture. If you can see that, then you know your brush is nicely loaded. And all those little pimples of paint are mirrored by what's happening on the end of the brush. Let me put that against my palette. My brush has got lots and lots of lovely little pimples of paint on it. And although you can't see it very well, I want to try and paint sort of individuals, just kind of fill it full of colour here, just kind of stabbing at it and hoping for the best. Think about painting individual little shapes at the back and maybe in the foreground. So let's think about the bushes at the back. And I know this is dark and you can't really see very much. It's dark against those. Remember that rock I put in the back? That's kind of my filler rock. So I'm just doing one little bush here. Notice the action here. Touch, press, back to center and then off. Touch, press, back to center and off. And by doing that, I create like a little explosion of paint, but no skidding. And that's the key. You don't want your brush to slide. You want it to leave a little imprint like that. A little burst of paint, lovely and textured. And this is going to be so much easier to get my highlights to stick to. So I've done one bigger bush, maybe a couple of smaller ones here in the foreground. Fill this up with some more shadow, lovely dark green colour. And then I can think about adding maybe one or two little bushes in the foreground here. And again, I'm painting these more from in my imagination I am, because I can't see the exact sizes, but I'm trying to imagine where they would be. For my highlights, I'm going to switch to a nice new brush here. And again, through Cad Yellow, a little sap green. And once again, I'm pulling through on that rounded side. I'm training my brush. What I'm doing is I'm just pulling my brush through one direction so that it gets kind of used to being pulled through and used in one direction, bending the bristles back and creating that nice little textured pattern. That same little textured patterns on here. Now, what do we think about that colour? Do you think it's going to work well with all these other colours I've got in here? Or do you think it's a little bit eye-popping? Again, think about these things when you're painting away. Think about the values you've used before and the sort of colours you're using now. Because I think that colour's a little too sort of citrus again. I've used some of my dark underpainting colour here. Maybe a little touch of white as well. We'll lighten it, but it won't make it sort of too vibrant, no too sort of eye-popping. Again, press your brush gently into the palette and get a lot of lovely texture on that brush. Rounded side to the top. I was pretty heavy-handed with this because the dark stiff colour, it does need a little bit more of a push. This paint is a little more soft and delicate, so you've got to be a bit more gentle with it. I always describe it as being like a bus trying to deliver the passengers to the bus stop. You want to drive the bus up, let the passengers jump off without crashing the bus. I think the light's going to come through here. I might try and highlight this little bush first. Again, touch, little pressure and back. Just leave a little tiny imprint of the brush. So this is the bright side. My brush is running out of passengers. They've all jumped off. But there's enough there to do the left side. The side that's in shadow. Put a few more little dabs on there. Now you see I've run out of passengers. All the paint's off. It's all onto the canvas. And there's no point in hammering this brush on that palette, on the painting. It's not going to give up any more paint. It's gone. But top tip here. Before you reload it, give it a little flick on a paper towel. Don't have to clean it completely, just a little flick. Just knocks off any of the little dark touches that I might have picked up. And we can reload our brush. Some fresh colour. A little push. And notice I didn't put any dark colour back here. I didn't transfer any of the dark paint from my painting back into my highlight colour. It stayed fresh and bright and lovely. So there's a little top tip for you. Now, maybe I'll do this little one here. And it's got to be a bit brighter than the background bushes there because I want this to stand away. So let's do a little test push. Yeah, that stands away, doesn't it? A little touch, press. No pressure on that brush. I'm running out of paint. All my little passengers have got off. I'll do some shadows. There, so I've done two nice little bushes there. Lots of lovely shadow. These ones are going to sit just here above the water. Rounded side to the top again. Phew, look at that. See how that catches the light. And I think it's enough on here just to do a little bush behind it. I'll let that one just fade away. Maybe something just in here. Not much brush to work with here. There we go. See, 3, 2 and 3. Got a nice little balance there. And I want some reflections, so I'm going to knock off all the surplus paint. And just with what's left on my brush, I'm going to just grab a little of this colour. Press, pull down. A little wiggle, pull down. A little wiggle, you see, kind of cuts into the paint. There we go. I think this reflection should be a little brighter. Let's grab some of that white Indian yellow colour. A little bit of that. Nope, not quite. I think that's going to be closer to the colour I need here. And again, I just want to reflect that little bush there because it's so bright and sparkly. Look at that. And then edge to centre. Side of the brush, gently, just barely touching. I hope these aren't going to get caught, but if they do, they do. Oh, I'm careful. There we go. I managed to squeeze past them. A little bit of that blue and white colour there just for a little waterline here. I think a few little fiddly diddlies, some scratchy sticks and twigs, maybe a few little stems and stalks in here would work a treat. I'll do some more of that and we'll do some time lapse through that. So if you enjoyed watching me fix my little creek mistakes and turning my oopsies into art, then stick around. I've got some more lovely paintings for you to watch. And by the way, if you want to support the channel, don't forget, all you have to do is reach down and click the like button. You can even subscribe and leave me a lovely comment. Now then, time for some more videos.